يات شيء نكي كولي داش جنة كنيا أني نشلون look at دنا باششين إذا ثنا داش نالت هو هاد ليني داش شيء هت أوي دنا استنا نشله. I'm of the Towering House clan. I'm born for the Reed people clan. Maternal grandparents are of the water that flows together. Paternal grandparents are of the Many Goats clan. And I come from the Diné Nation. I reside in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I'm one of the Tribes and Climate Change program managers for the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals. And I believe my co-manager, Karen Cazzetto, is on here. And so I want to give her a shout out. So I will be your facilitator for this round of, well, I guess this only round for the breakout session for this water availability. So I hope a lot of you, or all of you, were able to see Dr. Daryl Vihil's presentation earlier today, which was fascinating. So let's have a good discussion. If you could use the chat box to ask questions, but if you could verbalize it, that would be even better. But before we move on, I wanted to have, just in case you weren't here earlier today, have Daryl introduce himself again one more time, and then we'll introduce the other two lovely ladies as part of the breakout session. Daryl?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Daryl Vihil. Again, affiliation, Hickory Apache Nation, Zia Pueblo, Jemez Pueblo. I'm the water administrator for the Hickory Apache Nation. And I'm also the co-facilitator of the Water and Tribes Initiative. It's an initiative based in the Colorado River Basin that has twofold agenda. One is to build tribal capacity, and the other one is to build on the existing collaborative effort.
Thank you. Yeah, really appreciate you being here. So you all have Daryl's attention for this breakout session, so I hope you ask some really good questions of him and of each other too. So before we move on, I'd like our note taker, the lovely Kathy Lynn, to introduce herself.
Good afternoon.
Nikki and Kathy, it's Mike.
Hey!
How are you?
Great.
It's good to see you,
sir.
and I'm sorry I'm not going to be able to stay in this in your breakout session. I've got some more stuff going on back with my contracts and grant stuff, but it's good to see you.
Nice to see you too, Mike. Thanks for being
here.
here.
Are doing well, and I'm just recovering from COVID. It kind of took us, my family, my wife, my daughter, and myself, but we're alive and we're grateful. Getting better every day.
Right, Mike. Thank you.
Good to see you guys. I'll be back.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Lynn. I coordinate the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Project. I'm based in Oregon and really grateful to be here with you all today. I'll be taking notes during the session, and also I'm going to be pasting in some of the great questions that came up during the main session that related to water availability.
Awesome, Kathy. Really appreciate you being here. And also let's move to our youth representative. You saw a photograph of her, but also she is the youth representative for this tract. So Nicole, would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Kuhn. I am a member of the Skidegate Band of the Haida Nation in BC, Canada. Currently, I'm a PhD student at the Information School at the University of Washington, where I study and learn more about how Indigenous communities, primarily in the US and Canada, but throughout globally, are using information technology to address environmental and health concerns. And I join you today as a student, as a tribal member, but also as a mother of kids who are even in college through middle school who are next to inherit this earth from us. So the decisions we are making today are certainly beginning to impact them now as they emerge as adults. So thank you. I appreciate the
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. And Nicole is studying with Dr. Clarita Left Hand Begay, if you know her. So thanks to her for Dr. Begay for connecting us. All right, so I wish I could share my screen. Apparently everyone else can, but so we're gonna do this old school and you'll just see my lovely face until I can get screen sharing. But I wanted to let all of you know that the core committee has come up with a resource document. It is a Google link, and I will put it in the, I have just put it in the chat box, so you can click on that. And Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit more about that? And because she created it, and for each breakout session or topic.
Sure. The idea with this Google resource document is that we want to compile as many resources as possible per the main areas discussed during this event. And so one of the things that we'll be doing after today is taking all of your recommendations and populating this resource list so that we can share it afterwards.
Yes, thank you so much. And if you do have a resource that is not on there, there's 3 of them on there for now. And Daryl, I did include the study report from the 10 Tribes Partnership. And I included the website for the partnership too. So if you're interested in viewing that, I think you should also just do it for fun, because it's one of the more impressive websites I've seen and whatnot. So
It won an award.
yes, and it has a map that Daryl showed a little bit more in depth of the Colorado River basin, and it goes all the way up to Wyoming and whatnot. So check that out if you can. Great. All right, so I thought we could start this session by asking a question. I know there's some questions in the chat box, but I think I'd liked the first question, Kathy, if you don't mind typing it into the chat box, and get the conversation going, and then we can go to the chat box questions. And there's some really good ones on there. And so the first question is, I think some of you have already put this into the previous chat box in the main room, but also here, I want you to talk about what are the primary needs tribes have in addressing this issue of water availability. What do you feel are the primary needs tribes have? So for example, one of them could be, as Daryl mentioned in his presentation earlier, is having a seat at the decision-making table. You can either type into the chat box, Daryl, Nicole, Kathy, you guys can get the conversation going.
So you want me to start?
Sure, why not? Utilize you.
Yeah, so I think, thank you for the shout out for the tribal water study. That was definitely a reaction to, again, the exclusion of tribal participation in the basin study, supply demand study that started in 2009. And we fought really hard to get recognition and disclaimer language in that final document that ultimately said that the broader basin study didn't adequately capture, tribal water rights in the basin. So it formed the basis of the foundation of a collaborative that still exists now with the Bureau of Reclamation that didn't exist before. And so it becomes really, really important in terms of how tribes can build a consensus. And in this case, it was like, we're not going to take this anymore. This is enough. And so we got to tell our own story. And by doing that, it addresses a whole lot of the water availability issues that, how do you build a consensus among 10 tribal sovereigns, in distinct different geographic areas in 2 different basins, upper, lower basin, but we did it in terms of, finding out the commonality, and the commonality was pretty easy. Like you mentioned, there's policy issues. Throwing tribal settlements or potential settlements or tribal water needs on top of 100 years of existing policy that we were not engaged in, it makes it relatively difficult, especially when you're dealing again with the massive amount of governance structures there. So policy is always a big issue. infrastructure, of course, is going to be another one of those. I mean, yeah, sometimes settlements come with it, you know, and you know, Winter says water should be made available for the purposes of the reservation, like living and dying, I would think. But and so when we start to think about, you know, so you've got infrastructure issues, you've got policy issues, and then you continue with funding in terms of planning and again, the ability to be self-determined and your ability to develop your water rights. But the way it's structured right now, you know, we don't have any ability to do that right now. We're dependent absolutely on the 7 basin states and the federal government. And so, and again, that's the reason, you know, building off the 10 Tribes Partnership Tribal Water Study and the relationships that were built there, you know, it's expanded now because of the need. And I think one of the things that's really fundamental to this conversation is that tribes are at different spectrums of capacity. But, you know, tribes, you know, have gotten up to speed rather quickly, and kudos to tribes because, again, you know, we've really had to lay out a picture to non-indigenous world about what tribal leadership and tribal governance has to deal with on a daily basis because there's not an awareness of that. So by connecting and building those relationships, and there's actually the rest of the basin now is saying, well, there needs to be a place for tribes to meet. And like, yeah, that's right.
That's what we've been saying all along, right? No, I think you've outlined some really good points there. And I want to add to that by using Shannon McNeely's comment about how she's channeling Gary Collins from the Wind River tribe, who says if they don't already have them, tribal water protocols are very important to have, and tribal water codes to tribal water codes I think are really important to have, and she did put a NCAI link, resource link in there. So I think that's really important, just that recognition from the decision makers. I think that's really, really important. Nicole, did you have anything? Do you want to add anything to that question? I don't mean to call you out. Just want to give you some time to talk.
I appreciate this opportunity to learn and listen. I'm really at the beginning of understanding tribal water. I think a lot about information and technology and environmental and health issues, but I'm really just beginning to learn about the tribal water issues here. So thank you for that opportunity.
Of course. Yes, and I want to thank you, Nicole, and I want to mention that I think it's been reiterated, and I'll reiterate it again, as Daryl and Nicole and others mentioned, that when we think of water availability, it's like the ability to turn on a faucet or go to the windmill or go to the faucet down the road and haul water. I think it's about more than that. It's about access to clean, potable water for ourselves, but also our livestock and whatnot. So water availability, we think of desert immediately, arid lands and whatnot. But this is an issue, as Daryl said in his previous presentation, about how even some of our Alaska family members can't even get water lines into their homes, as we have that problem down south in the Southwest here. So think about water availability in that context also. Let's see.
And I'm happy to address the tribal water codes are really, really important, depending on whatever unique situation your tribe may be in, because you have to build up layers and layers of protection of the water right, and we do that like at our tribe by building a water code. The tribe is Title 21 of our tribe's code specifically. But we have the ability to also lease any excess water that we have. In all our contracts, we've built in, our tribal court is the court of competent jurisdiction as well. So constantly, building those layers in terms of our self-determination in terms of our able to be able to govern ourselves in terms of like this. We know what we're doing with our water, but now we need the available pathways to make it happen. And understanding that we live in broader communities, so absolutely making sure that those integrations and those connections are at least available, or there's a willingness to engage in those conversations. Because what you said earlier was so important in terms of like, it's all connected. And so, you know, and that's been the problem, you know, to a large extent, you know, in my experience of water policy in the Colorado River Basin, is that it's siloed. It's over here. Well, let's deal with the tribal problem. Well, it's not a tribal problem. It's a human problem in the Colorado River Basin.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Daryl, for putting more content into that. I'd like to go to Tom Schlossler. I'm butchering your name. I apologize.
No, that's quite all right. Thank you. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm a tribal attorney up here in Washington State, and I've worked for tribes on water issues for many, many years. And I think it's helpful to recognize that tribal water planning is at so many different stages. And tribe situations are really unique, are almost all unique. And one thing that helps me to think about it is to separate water availability, potable water, from water quality. Now, of course, those are connected issues, but for tribes that aren't already deeply involved in water planning and water codes and so on, getting at treatment as a sovereign or treatment as a state under the Clean Water Act via EPA is a good way to get into it and to start to plan for what your water resources are and what your water quality problems are. You know, the winners' rights are very complicated, and they're so different from one reservation to the next. And in the Pacific Northwest, a really big issue for us is in-stream flow rights. That is water to support fisheries. And that's different than water for potable, you know, consumption or for irrigation and so on. So I recommend, you know, EPA recently changed its wrong interpretation of Section 518 of the Clean Water Act in a way that makes it easier for tribes to obtain TAS, treatment as a sovereign status. So take advantage of that. There's a template up on their webpage, easy to follow. And just one other plug, the University of Washington Law School is putting on a thing on water law on February 12th, if anybody wants to tune in.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. Yes, please. I don't know if you can put that into the chat box if you have time.
I'll do it.
That would be really great. Thank you. And with that, I'd like to call on the one and only Shannon McNeely. I know you wanted to add to the question or the comment that you made earlier on the chat box.
Yeah, I just, thanks, Nikki, and hi, everybody. I see lots of friendly faces and names. I just wanted to add, and Tom, I think you said you're an attorney, so maybe you can add to this with more specifics. But there has been a long-standing moratorium by the Department of Interior on officially recognizing tribal water codes. And so I posted that link from NCAI about a resolution to get the Interior to officially lift the moratorium and officially start recognizing tribal water codes. And that's important because a lot of tribes have water codes, many still do not, but even the ones who do, their tribal water code is not legally recognized. And so therefore, it not only is it important to have a tribal water code for all the reasons Daryl talked about, and all the reasons Gary Collins ever talked about, if you've ever heard Gary Collins talk about it in terms of, you know, it really lays out the protocols and the standards for the tribes, how they want to regulate and allocate their water themselves, their water rights, their legal water rights. But what the moratorium did is it gave a lot of states, and Wind River Reservation being in Wyoming, of course, is a classic example because Wyoming's so horrible in terms of how they treat their tribes vis-a-vis water rights. but it gives the states more ability to not recognize the tribal authority of their water code. So by lifting that moratorium, it thereby legally validates tribals' authority to regulate and allocate their water the way they want to in their tribal water codes. So Tom or Daryl or anybody else, if you have any other specifics that you can talk about, Rachel Novak specifically asked me to expand on that because obviously she's at BIA, which is in the Department of Interior, but this moratorium has been a real stranglehold on a lot of tribes. So if anyone can give any more specifics, I welcome that.
Sure, this is Tom. I'm not sure the moratorium exists, and I am pretty sure that tribes don't need approval of water codes. The legal effect of a water code isn't going to depend on BIA approval. So I kind of think this is an issue that we don't need to be very concerned about. At least it hasn't been in my law practice and working for tribes.
So it does exist, and like I said, for some tribes, it's actually important depending on what state they're in. So again, I put a link in there from NCAI about this specific issue, lifting the moratorium, so people can go to that if they want to. Again, I think it's very different depending on which state and which region you're in.
I think that's right, and the Clean Water Act does delegate authority to tribes if you go through the TAS process.
Thank you, Shannon and Tom. That was really interesting. We'll have to look more into that. I'll look more into that, and I think people should. But really quick, before we don't have too much time. I wish we had all the time in the world because there's some really great questions. Before I go into some of the questions in the chat box, Daryl, were you wanting to say something to add to that conversation? Yes, and then we'll go to Nicole's question after Daryl.
Sure.
Thank you.
And, a couple things the last two people raised, in-stream flows. My tribe is part of the San Juan River Recovery and Implementation Program, which is created a long time ago to recover two species of endangered fish, the Colorado pike minnow and the razorback sucker. And it's crazy because we've spent millions of dollars, and we're still trying to work on a process, maybe as part of our ability to develop our water rights, to be able to utilize some type of lease to reclamation for in-stream flows, specifically for the recovery of those two endangered species of fish. That's the first thing. The second thing is building something really unique in terms of what we're doing here in Jicarilla. Jicarilla is almost all its water, except for some of its groundwater, comes from the Colorado River. And so, we've built our capacity on all the policy in the Colorado River, but New Mexico has an allocation of Colorado River water also, but it doesn't have the same capacity as the tribal sovereign does, in my opinion, in terms of where we're at within the policy picture. So right now in New Mexico, we're actually setting the stage for the first of its kind and testing the waters about a sovereign to sovereign transaction, and really trying to create that sovereign to sovereign environment between a tribal sovereign and the state sovereign, because that becomes really, really crucial in terms of our ability to forward policy as we move forward. So I'm really grateful that was mentioned, because and that's kind of the movement of tribes in the basin in general, is how do you especially given climates maybe can be considered anti-tribes, like in Arizona, where their renegotiation committee has limited it to 3 tribes participating out of 22. That kind of thing happening. So definitely a push for tribal sovereigns to assert, their sovereignty, and really pushing the 7 basin states to acknowledge that sovereignty.
Yes, thank you, Daryl. Yes, assert that right. All right, I have a question up here from Nicole, our youth observer, and anyone can answer this, but she's asking, specific to water availability, can you suggest some activities or actions that we might implement today that will help us build our resilience in our youth and help them prepare to be future leaders? So we talked a lot about the policy documents and the rules, regulations, and everything. But like for the youth that are starting out, what are some of the activities or actions you guys may have in mind? I think we saw one already, right? That great youth video that Coral showed previous to this breakout session. And anyone, let's see. What do you guys think? Somebody says Indian water law seminar. That, you know, anybody have any thoughts on this? Activities or actions that we might implement today? I'll come up with one. I think really just taking, you know how you take your kids to like powwows or song and dances or ceremonies, and they just kind of get used to the songs and eventually they integrate themselves into it. You know, their choice, of course, and sometimes we don't have a choice, but I think that's one way we can do it is just keep bringing them. I've been taking my kids, 10 and 6-year-old, to a lot of rallies, to a lot of protests, but to ceremonies and whatnot. And they ask a lot of questions about that these days. So let's go to Stephanie Sosi. Do you want to say briefly your thoughts on this question?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I just wanted to chime in. I'm also an attorney that has dabbled in some water law stuff. And I think, you know, it's interesting for me as a sort of a newish practitioner and coming from, you know, a background where I was always on the ground and then going into the legal context. And I think what is important is that the conversation we're having about water quantity and water availability and conservation is all really embedded in Western water law, and Western water law is incredibly antiquated. I mean, there's a lot of doctrines that really prohibit, you know, the ability to conserve. So if I were to give a suggestion to our youth, I think that, you know, at some point we're going to need to break away from that. Like, Western water law is not equipped to deal with climate change, and it's not equipped to deal with a lot of the things, the innovative things that I've seen our presenters, you know, present on here today. So, you know, for our youth, I would suggest finding a way to change it. And I don't know how. I'm sort of in the middle of this. You know, I'm in the legal sphere when I need to be, but you know, I think that we really need to figure out a way to be innovative and to and for tribes to leverage some of the things, the tools that already exist to advance their own water quality standards and really occupy that space and then be able to expand from there. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Stephanie. Yes, I agree. And I think you made a really good point about how we automatically, because we're so, our lives, I guess our ways are so ingrained in the Western laws and regulations, going away from it or changing it. And you're kind of put out a challenge to the youth. And I think one thing I would put in there is that the Yurok, and some other tribes maybe have been doing this, but I know of the Yurok, who have given rights of nature to the Klamath River. Then our Maori family in New Zealand have also given human rights, the same rights that we have if we're violated in any way to their land, to a river that they have. So that could be one thing. And whatnot. So I think that's a really good thought that you have there. I'd be curious to see and read what other folks have. Sharon says she appreciates Stephanie's comments. Longer term collaborative processes, not entirely focused on legal issues, would be helpful. Youth could be involved in those discussions and work on the various projects and whatnot. So I don't know if I see any other hands raised yet.
Nikki, I can go if you want me to.
Please.
Just real quickly about, you know, looking at we're looking at the whole Colorado River policy piece, you know, at the 10 Tribes Partnership. you know, in our mission statement, it's really simple: communicate, collaborate, and educate. And educate in both internally and externally, you know, with not only within the partnership, but within the partnership tribes themselves. And then we also started looking, when we went further than that, you know, looking at the broader picture of tribal leadership in the basin and the lack of, you know, participants in a lot of that activity. You know, how is it that we can start to engage, or if you build a new type of tribal leader, if you will. And so we're having these conversations now about a tribal leadership institute with the University of Arizona, Fort Lewis College in Colorado, and then the University of New Mexico as well. But understanding that, you know, education is going to be a critical component of building, you know, these future tribal leaders. And at the heart of it's going to be capacity in terms of, you know, either learning the rules as they exist, or hopefully they'll be forwarding the rules that we've put in place for them.
Thank you very much, Daryl. Njona. To add to that, we only have a few minutes, so I wanted to recognize Kathleen George's comment where she says the climate changed our rivers for our salmon, lamprey, and all our fishes decades ago. This is not generally recognized as the survival crisis for our fisheries. In the Willamette Basin, Oregon, we are on the losing our native fisheries in several basins. I guess goes along with it, is like she's asking, how do we compel more people to recognize this as a critical climate problem and build the will that we need to make? And Daryl just mentioned that education and building that capacity. Young people, you are up and coming. We say that all the time. We'll need you when you're 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. You know, a lot of our elders are passing on today, so get that knowledge from them and make sure, and that strength also from those of us that are on the ground here right now. I want to also recognize Rachel Novak. She also says, keeping tribal nations as senior water rights holders is important and we shouldn't lose that precedent also. And there's also a fact, I want to throw a fact in here. We got about less than 60 seconds left. In the state of Arizona, the state was created after the Navajo Nation was created. I believe you water rights attorneys can tell me better, but so technically Navajo Nation should have #1 water rights over the state of Arizona, but of course we know that's not the case. Thank you all for the questions. Thank you for the Daryl and Kathy and Nicole. Thank you for being on here, and to all of you for the questions. We'll make sure that this goes to the appropriate people, and hopefully they'll answer it directly by email.